You think you know the story of the 10 plagues of Egypt, right? I mean, it's one of those foundational stories of liberation that many of us learn in broad strokes. But what if the version we all know is, well, the sanitized version? Today, we're going to go way past that familiar list and uncover the visceral, absolutely terrifying reality of what it meant to actually live through them. Yeah, this is pretty much how the story gets summed up, isn't it? It's like a rapid-fire list of really bad days. And it makes it easy to just think of the plagues as a series of strange, magical annoyances that eventually just wore down a really stubborn pharaoh. But what if this was so much more than an inconvenience? What if it was a systematic, horrifying dismantling of an entire civilization? What did it actually feel like, look like? What did it smell like to be there? Let's dive in. Okay, so to really get what happened here, we have to understand one absolutely crucial point. These were not random magical events. Oh no. They were targeted acts carried out with a terrifying purpose by very specific and very powerful agents. You see, according to a lot of theological sources, these weren't just natural disasters that happened to line up. They were administered by beings known as judgment angels. And one source describes them as the most terrifying of their kind, beings who show up for one reason and one reason only: to execute judgment. This wasn't abstract, it was deeply personal. So the campaign begins with an all-out assault on the very ecosystem that kept Egypt alive. The first 4 plagues, they weren't just about some pests showing up. They were about collapsing the natural world and taking direct aim at the gods Egypt worshipped. It all started with the Nile River. This wasn't just a river. It was the lifeblood of their entire civilization. They even worshipped it as a god named Hapi, and it was turned into an object of absolute horror. And the sensory detail here is just brutal. This wasn't just metaphorically red water. It was a river choked with death. The text is so explicit. The river stank. Can you just imagine your main source of life, for drinking, for bathing, for everything, becoming a toxic, foul-smelling graveyard? People were desperately digging in the dirt next to it just for a sip of clean water. So, with the water poisoned, the horror then moves onto the land, and it comes in the form of an animal that was actually considered sacred to Hecate, their goddess of fertility. And again, the story isn't just about frogs being everywhere. The real horror is in what happens next. You have millions of these amphibian carcasses now rotting under the hot sun. And the scripture highlights the result. The land stank. It's a massive, unavoidable biohazard. The stench of death is everywhere. That whole ecological collapse, well, it created the perfect breeding ground for the next wave of torment. And out of that stinking land came an infestation that was completely and totally impossible to escape. I mean, the language in the text is so intense. The dust itself transforms into lice, covering every single person and every animal. And then come swarms of flies so thick that the land itself is described as being corrupted. This is a total breakdown of sanitation, of personal space. It's just this pervasive, crawling, unavoidable torment. The assault just keeps escalating. After destroying the environment, the judgment turns directly on the bodies of everyone in Egypt, both animal and human. It starts striking at their health and their wealth. This direct bodily assault came in a couple of waves. First, a plague just wipes out the livestock. And remember, that's their food, their labor, their entire economy, gone. It was also a direct shot at deities like Hathor, often shown as a cow. And then the affliction turns on the people themselves in the form of these agonizing boils, described so vividly as breaking forth with blains, basically erupting pustules. And the severity of this plague is just undeniable. These weren't minor sores. They were so agonizing, so debilitating, that even Pharaoh's own powerful magicians, the guys who had tried to replicate the earlier plagues, were completely incapacitated. They literally could not stand before Moses because of the pain. So from physical affliction, the plagues expand to this cataclysmic scale. The fundamental elements of nature, the sky, the weather, they're turned into weapons of mass destruction, and they're targeting the gods of the sky and the harvest. This was a devastating 1-2 punch against Egypt's entire food supply. First, you get this superstorm of hail mingled with fire that just shatters everything. It breaks the trees, it flattens the crops. Then, whatever little survived was utterly consumed by a locust swarm so dense it literally blacked out the sun. The result? Total agricultural annihilation. But before the final blow, something else came, something that was maybe even more terrifying. It was a plague that attacked the mind, and the chief god of the entire Egyptian pantheon, Ra, the sun god. This is one of the most chilling descriptions in the entire account. This wasn't just a power outage. It was a supernatural darkness, an oppressive, tangible presence, so profound it could be felt. For 3 whole days, an entire nation was plunged into this paralyzing, sensory-depriving void. So after the systematic destruction of their world, their bodies, and their very minds, the campaign reached its terrible climax, the final, the most intimate, and the most devastating judgment of them all. After 9 escalating demonstrations of power that shattered the environment, the economy, and the psyche of an entire nation, the final command was issued. The text describes it with this chilling finality. There's no ambiguity. At one precise moment at midnight, the judgment was executed, and its reach was absolute. It started at the very, very top of the social ladder, with the heir to the man who was considered a living god on earth. And it reached all the way down to the very bottom. No one was exempt because of their status or their wealth or their power. From the palace to the prison, the loss was identical. And this is the result. It wasn't silence, it was a sound. The sound of an entire nation's collective, simultaneous grief. A great cry, because in every single Egyptian home there was loss. So when we look past that simple summary, when we get into the graphic, gut-wrenching details of the source text, the story really changes. It's not just a simple tale of liberation anymore. It forces us to ask a really tough question. Is this a story of freedom? Or is it a story of one of the most terrifying and absolute displays of judgment ever recorded?